Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech, and today we're going to be talking about Orzhov Helping Hand in Pioneer. Definitely a very, very cool list. Obviously, for those who know the card that is on the thumbnail, it's going to be a very, very spicy list. So before we hop into it here, let me know at the end of the video in the comment section below, what do you think about the list? Is there any card that I should have included? As well as if you have any suggestions for upcoming videos, just let me know in the comment section below. So, okay, Orzhov Helping Hand. So, I was trying to come up with a name for this. I thought about like doing Orzhov Reanimator, but I mean, it does reanimate, but it doesn't reanimate like big creatures. I thought about calling it like Mini Animator or something like that. I couldn't find a good name, so I decided to just name it Orzhov Helping Hand, and that is in large part to the card Helping Hand. It's a new card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, so we're playing 8 of these mini reanimation effects. So obviously, Helping Hand, 1 white sorcery, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So kind of like Unearth, you know, which is like a card that's in Modern. It's been around in Pauper for a long time. Helping Hand is very, very good at just returning cheap creatures from our graveyard on the cheap. I mean, only 1 white mana, that's a pretty darn good rate. Then we're also playing Extraction Specialist, 3/2 for 3 lifelink. When it enters, return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control Extraction Specialist, which honestly is not a big deal because we can get it back. We can get a whole bunch of additional value from our different creatures. We also have a couple sack outlets technically, so if we really need the creature right away, we can just sacrifice the Extraction Specialist, get a little bit of value, then maybe even Helping Hand, bring another creature back, that kind of thing. So this is kind of the bread and butter of the deck, but let's go ahead and hop into the payoffs and the synergy cards. So obviously we're playing 4 Archfiend's Vessel. For those who knew the thumbnail, you kind of knew what was coming. Archfiend's Vessel is such a unique, cool card and can be so powerful. 1/1 for 1 with lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, exile it. If you do, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. So it's a pretty sweet card. I've lost this card a couple times here and there just because when you reanimate it, it does some really, really silly things, which obviously Helping Hand and Extraction Specialist can reanimate to this very, very easily. So definitely a big fan of the card. I would say it's probably my favorite card in the deck. We're also playing 4 Citrus Supplier and 4 Mire Triton. Obviously cards that are just great at filling our graveyard, which is great obviously for our reanimation targets, but also for another card that we'll see on the next slide here. Mire Triton's also kind of sweet just because it does have Death Touch, so it kind of makes it a little awkward for our opponents. You know, we're very easily able to get it into our graveyard, but we're able to block and trade up with our opponent's creatures, which is definitely pretty sweet. So definitely a big fan of those 8 cards that help fill our graveyard for sure. So our next slide here is kind of, I would say, it's not the bread and butter of the deck, but these are really just our strong 2-drops that I'm a big fan of all these cards. So we're playing 2 Bartolome del Presidio. Big fan of the card. It's not huge in terms of our game plan. It's really just additional value, and between you and me, I really, really like the card. So Bartolome, obviously, sacrifice another creature artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on it. There's a lot of synergies we can do where we can sack our creatures that are in play, and then we can Helping Hand them or Extraction Specialist them right back to the battlefield. Obviously, it's a free sack outlet, so even if we get Helping Hands or anything stuck in our hand, if we have a Bartolome in play, we just sack it, and then we can get the value. So it's not just a random card sitting in our hand. So definitely a big fan of Bartolome, but I'm only playing 2 copies of it. We're also playing 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers just because we are playing a lot of self-mill, and this card very easily comes back from the graveyard. A 3/2 for 2. Sure, it can't block, but this card is very, very strong. For those who played Standard a handful of years ago, y'all know how powerful this card can definitely be. So definitely a big fan of Scrap Heap Scrounger. And then we're also playing 4 Souls of the Lost, or as I like to call it, basically just Tarmogoyf. So obviously star and star +1. Its power is equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that +1. And then as an additional cost to cast it, we have to discard a card or sacrifice a permanent, which once again, we don't care that we're discarding our cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger or Archfiend's Vessel, or really any of our creatures, because we can reanimate them back. And then sacrificing a permanent, obviously, you know, if we have an extra land, or we just wanted any creature that we want to reanimate later, we can just go ahead and toss it in the yard and we can grab it back later. So definitely a big fan of Souls of the Lost. What's also really cool about this, when I was building this deck, I kind of realized how many cool Lost Caverns of Ixalan cards that were in here, because we're playing the Helping Hands, the Bartolome, and the Souls of the Lost. So definitely very, very cool that we can that we have a deck that got a huge boost from new cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So we got one more slide to talk about here. So obviously we're playing Skyclave Apparition. And then we're also playing Bitter Triumph. I know I'm skipping over Thoughtseize, which I'll get to that in a second. But those are our main removal spells in the deck. Skyclave is great because obviously Exile's an on-token permanent with CMC 4 or less. We can also Helping Hand it back into play if we want to after it dies, which is pretty sweet. So definitely a big fan of Skyclave Apparition. We can't hit it back with Extraction Specialist, but honestly that's perfectly fine. It's still a very, very good card to be playing. And then Bitter Triumph is just a great removal spell. 2 mana, destroy creature, Planeswalker. As an additional cost to cast, we have to discard a card or pay 3 life. Obviously, we have cards that are going to come back onto the battlefield later on, so that way if we discard like a Scrap Heap Scrounger, or again something we want to reanimate with our Helping Hand or Extraction Specialist, it doesn't even matter, we're going to come back. So essentially it's just 2 mana, destroy a creature or Planeswalker, and it also helps feel our Souls of the Lost. So definitely a big fan of Bitter Triumph. Then obviously Thoughtseize is Thoughtseize. It's a very, very powerful card. I mean, it's one of the probably the best black card in the entire metagame. It's just that good. There's really nothing I can say about Thoughtseize that really hasn't been said already. So that's our entire main board except for our lands, and then don't go anywhere after that. We still have to talk about our sideboarding and our budget options. So lands are pretty simple for the most part. It's going to be a standard black-white mana base. We're playing 4 Concealed Courtyard, 4 Godless Shrine, and 1 Caves of Koilos. We're also playing 4 Bright Climb Pathway, and that's all of our dual lands, but we're also playing 1 Takenuma and 1 Aganjo as our flex lands. Obviously, they're great in the deck. Takenuma, special shout out to that because it's very good with our deck because it mills 3 and returns a creature or planeswalker, which not that we're playing any planeswalkers, but it returns them to our hand, and then it just helps fuel our graveyard, which is just great. So definitely a big fan of the Takenuma in here. And then rounding out our lands, we're playing 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrant, 1 Plains, and 1 Swamp. As our spicy basic land of the day, these are actually I would say the full art Plains and Swamps that I probably play the most. I opened a ton of Battle for Zendikar back in the day, so when I think of Battle for Zendikar, like, these are kind of like, this is what I think of. I think of like the plains and the swamps and the mountains from this deck. From this set. So that's why I decided to pick the plains and the swamp. Definitely a big fan of the artwork. So that's our entire main board. Let's go and hop into the sideboard guide here, which is really, really simple. So obviously we're going to want some graveyard hate. Tormod's Crypt and Soul Guide Lantern are the best options. We do not want to play Rest in Peace in this deck, because Rest in Peace is symmetrical, so we don't want to be exiling our own graveyard. So do keep that in mind. Do not play Rest in Peace in this deck. Then we're going to want some extra removal and interaction. So I've got cards like Fatal Push. I've also got cards like Invasion of Gobakhan and Necromentia. Obviously, they're all fantastic cards. Invasion's kind of like a pseudo... It's not really like a Thoughtseize, but it's kind of like a Thoughtseize effect where we can get some additional value from it, which is pretty sweet. And then Fatal Push, obviously, is great extra removal for the small creature decks. And then Necromentia is great against combo decks where they rely on like 1 or 2 specific cards. We can just take them out of their deck, and their deck is significantly weaker after that. And then the last thing I wanted to include is cards like Damping Sphere and Deafening Silence as good prison pieces. Obviously, Damping Sphere and Deafening Silence great against like the mono green decks, good against Lotus Field combo. Also pretty solid against Izzet Phoenix as well. So, and then also with the sideboard, if you're interested in what I'm playing to my exact numbers, you can also go to the description below and check out my list where you'll see the exact numbers there. But, you know, everybody's metagame's different, so keep in mind, this is not a for sure thing. This is kind of just a general guideline for good sideboard cards for your local FNM, that kind of thing. And the last thing I want to talk about is our budget options, which there's definitely... This deck is very top heavy, I would say. A lot of the deck is significantly, you know, cheap, except for a couple cards like Thoughtseize, for instance, which if you don't want to have Thoughtseize or you don't already have them, just go ahead and put in some Duresses. Perfectly fine card, gives you information, and honestly does a lot of the same thing most of the time. Then obviously you can cut some of the utility lands, like the Takenumas, the Aganjos. I didn't include this on here, but also you can trim on some of the dual lands. So instead of, you know, $10 Godless Shrines, that kind of thing, just play 4 Caves of Koilos. You can play the man lands, like the original one from Battle for Zendikar, or you can play the new one from Wilds of Eldraine. There's definitely a lot of ways to cut down on the land base, which is what I would say is most of the cost of the deck. If you trim all the expensive duels and the Thoughtseize, this deck is easily under $100. And I don't think you can get it quite to $50 unless you really cut like Souls of the Lost, which I wouldn't recommend. But overall, this deck is extremely cheap and very, very fun too. I don't know if I'd really call it's like a It's kind of an aggro deck, but it's kind of a mid-range deck, and it's kind of like a reanimator deck. It's a very, very unique deck. It kind of fights from all different angles. So, but regardless, this deck is very, very fun, and I actually, as of the day of the recording for this, I thought about this deck like 2 days ago pretty much, and was like, I really have to share this on the channel. So, all right, well, that is the end of the video. Thanks everybody for watching. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about the list? And also let me know if you decide to build this for your local FNM or anything like that. Just let me know in the comment section below. So I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.